Captain, were he captured at sea. However, your authority ends at the water's edge, which is precisely where my authority begins. And until such time as I am satisfied as to the validity of this alleged warrant, this man will retain his liberty.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another one of my Outlander reviews and the Season 3 finale. So I can just imagine how a lot of you probably feel right now. I mean, Season 3 is over, we're probably gonna have to wait a long time before Season 4 hits our screens. But at least there is, I'm gonna be bringing you videos over the course of the long break to come with every bit of news that gets released about Season 4. But speaking of the third season finale, this is exactly why I love the series and I love the novels. I mean, this isn't really about the romance here. I mean, the romance is great, don't get me wrong. But the heart of the matter is, this is more about amazing writing, amazing storytelling, and amazing acting when it comes to the series. It's also about the amazing wrap-up, the tying of loose ends of the existing stories before they open up a new story. So pretty much they don't get us lost in the story with a whole lot of questions pending. Instead, they tend to answer questions when their answers are actually due, rather than holding off on them and prolonging things the way many TV series do. But anyway, this finale just felt like the perfect conclusion and culmination to the events of the past 13 episodes, which were pretty great, even though a little bit flawed here and there. And until I actually got to watch this finale, my favorite episodes this season so far were episodes 8 and 9. And post those two episodes, I didn't really think any other episode this season would manage to top them. But then the finale kicked in and it did just that, and I really loved it. I know this does sound like a very long intro, but credit where credit is due, and this episode just did a whole lot for this season. I mean, some of you who are not here for the very first time probably know I thought there were some flaws with some episodes this season. And the thing is, while I still think those flaws do exist, I think this finale just made up for a whole lot of them. But in all cases, and if the time allows, I'm going to be doing this week's review in a totally different manner. What I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be talking about the finale, because after all, this is basically a finale review. But then after that, I'm probably going to be discussing from my own point of view what I thought went right and what I thought went wrong with this season. So if you are one of those weak-hearted people when it comes to criticism of their favorite TV series, please make sure you don't watch that last part of the video. And if you are one of those people who don't understand the difference between a novel and the TV adaptation of said novel, then that part of the video is probably not for you as well. But anyway, let's get to breaking down and reviewing the events of this episode. Number 1. Now on my review of last week's episode, I didn't want to sound like I'm complaining for the sake of complaining or just judging a book by its cover. So I basically never commented in full on the whole Leonard capturing Jamie situation. But as a matter of fact, I did not really like it. I thought it was a total cliche. This week around though, and while I do still think the same, I think it had its own silver linings. So the reason I think it's a cliche is because it's pretty much the very same trope from every single TV series, the Ross and Rachel trope. And yes, I'm talking about Ross and Rachel from Friends, and yes, I know it's a very bad example, but I thought I'd lighten the mood. But anyway, the cliche I'm talking about here is basically the bringing of two people together in a relationship, taking them apart, only to bring them again, and rinse and repeat. And I do understand, on other series it's usually a breakup, and on this series it's sort of an unfortunate separation, but it's basically same difference and it's kinda starting to get old. So at the end of season 2, they were separated, Claire went back to the 20th century, then they reunited on episode 6 of season 3, then they separated again, then they reunited again, then they separated again, then they reunited again, and then they almost separated again within a band away. But I'm not just out to criticize, and like I did state, this situation had sort of two silver linings. The first is basically all about the fact that the finale had very limited time on its hands, and basically it had to deal with a lot of arcs and make sure it ties loose ends. And doing away with the porpoise chasing the Artemis like in the novel at the very end, and making sure they replaced that with integrating the Leonard story into the John Gray story, I think that was a good idea to save time. That really allowed room for other arcs on this episode, especially the Geillis arc. It allowed it to come full circle in a manner of speaking. The other silver lining though was all about number 2. In an epic scene, and once again, we get to see Jamie saved by John Gray. It was really good. I mean, at first I was sitting there watching this scene, I was like, okay, this scene is gonna be stupid. He's gonna just abuse his power to save Jamie. But instead, that was not really the case, and the man actually used valid legal arguments to save the guy. I mean, he did manage to put Captain Leonard in sort of a you haven't read him his rights kind of situation. Leonard basically had no warrant for Jamie's arrest, he had no proof that a warrant exists for his arrest, and he could basically produce no proof of Jamie's alleged crime except word of mouth. And he did not even try to arrest him within his area of jurisdiction, that being open water. So pretty much over the course of 5 minutes, Leonard's stance kinda went from gotcha to I'm such a dumbass. But the most important thing worthy of highlighting here is the acting put into the character of John Grey. This scene wasn't really about what he said to deter John Grey from taking Jamie away, but instead it was more about how he said them. What I want to say here is that John Grey is a very well acted character from start to finish, on this scene and on this episode in specific, but nonetheless, overall, he's a great actor.
Till the next time then. Goodbye, John.
Goodbye, Jamie. And good luck.
Number 3 though. Now since last week's episode I was kind of wondering if they are gonna retcon this whole not killing Archibald Campbell. And they did on this episode. They actually ended up killing him. Of course they tied it all to Willoughby falling in love with Margaret, which I'm gonna talk about in a moment here, but nonetheless they ended up doing it. But once again, I'm assuming that because of the time constraint they had to do away with the original story of how Archibald ended up dead. But in all cases I don't think that matters. The man just deserved to die. Now when speaking of Willoughby killing Archibald, we've got to mention number 4, Margaret Campbell and Willoughby. I just love Willoughby. He is pretty much the most well-developed new character on the season, and I love every single scene with him. That love at first sight arc as well, that was just both hilarious and fun to watch. But setting the funny aside, if you want to count on anyone to make it feel heartfelt and amazing, then Willoughby is most definitely your guy. Now even though the other aspect of the scene is kind of far-fetched and a little bit unbelievable, and sort of magical, Margaret is actually happier, and clearly fine now. But speaking of Margaret, number 5, she does go crazy with visions again there. She sees the future for Claire, or well, her 20th century past. She kinda calls Jamie a monster, and then she goes for the entire abandoned away vision all over again. But that is also about the moment when Claire realizes that number 6, the 200-year-old baby, is Brianna. So pretty much the prophecy there is that this 200-year-old baby must die in order for this Scottish king to rise to the Scottish throne. And for the purpose of the dramatic effect, it kinda had to take Claire this long to realize it, even though it was kinda clear for us viewers the moment Geillis' eyes lit up when she heard of Bree. But all of this just went to further prove that number 7, Geillis is one crazy bitch. Like she's certifiably crazy. Beyond belief crazy. But with all her inherent insanity, I did love the acting put in her scenes with Claire on this episode. I mean, they were all pretty amazing. I did love as well how Claire did not just rush into revealing all her cards the way she's been doing this season from the very beginning. Geillis though did not really believe that Claire is just looking for Ian. She thought she's after the treasure. She thought she was the cause of the fallout between Cullum and Dougal, and Cullum's unease with the Jacobite uprising. But in order to prove to Geillis that her suspicions are wrong and that she wasn't really around for the past 20 years, number 8, Claire shows Geillis pictures of Bree, and right away Geillis just recognizes Brianna from when she met her on season 2 in 1968. And in the process she does realize as well that Claire tried to stop her from going through the stones to warn her against the witch trials. But even though you'd think that the sentiment would deter her right then and there from her wicked plans towards Ian and Bree, it did not. But amidst this entire conversation, number 9, Geillis and Claire discuss the science of traveling through the stones, and while Geillis thinks it's all about using a sacrifice to pass through, Claire believes it's all about who's on the other side waiting for you.
The sacrifice is required, Claire, for the sake of the cause.
But skipping through all the events between that scene and the final scene with Geillis, number 10, this time around, Geillis is gone for good, and as the mystery of your 200-year-old bones comes full circle and ends up solved. So I've basically been hinting about this for a while now. She is the white woman with the bones that Joe Abernathy called Claire in to consult on. And again, that was another kind of cliche because out of all the doctors in the world, she ends up being consulted on those bones. But anyway, we can always write that off to foreshadowing and dramatic effect and all that good stuff. But with Geillis being dead and on the ground, number 11, the way she looked as she laid there dead, she looked pretty old. Now we all know she was using dark magic to look this young, but the thing is with that scene I got this total Melisandre from Game of Thrones vibe. That very first time we got to see her taking off her choker, and we got to see her real, extremely old, or shall I call it ancient form. Number 12 though. Now the first time Jamie and Claire parted, it was to make sure Bree is born to safety. And this time around as well, they say their goodbyes because they know they might actually have to be separated again and once more to save their daughter. And there were a couple of things to love about that scene. One, the fact that it's a callback to the first time they actually separated at the end of season 2, and 2, the fact that Bree is still a priority over their romance. But the way Claire was drawn to that lake within the cave, now that went to prove her theory about being drawn to the person on the other side rather than needing a sacrifice. Number 13, since I mentioned the seeming reference to Melisandre from Game of Thrones, I've totally got to mention that Titanic moment. Now that scene with Jaime saving Claire and that log, that just felt so Titanic, like close to the very end of the movie. Now just like the case was with how the third novel ended, Claire and Jaime end up washing on the coast of Georgia. So just as promised, season 4 is gonna start over with the beginning of the 4th novel. But that being said, here comes the part that some of you might not really like. So I'm gonna be talking about what I think this season did right and what I think they did wrong. So let's just start with the positives. Now this season has developed so many new and old characters beyond any other season did. For returning characters, you have the example of Fergus, who got a decent amount of development. For newly introduced characters though, you've got Marsali and you've got Ian, and they both got amazing development. But out of all new characters, Mr. Willoughby was my absolute favorite, and he got amazing development as well. The only additional thing I would have wished with him is more scenes. I pretty much loved every scene with him. His meeting up with Claire for the first time, his helping her with Barton, his telling his story on board of the Artemis, that scene with the party, his scenes with Margaret Campbell. Everything was pretty amazing when it came to Mr. Willoughby. But of course next to Mr. Willoughby comes John Grey. He was as well one of the most well-developed characters this season, and he got to shine the most on this finale. But speaking of more positives, most of what this season added beyond the books was really good, and a lot of what it dropped from the books was dropped for understandable reasons. Pretty much this season had a 13-episode run with so much story to tell, so it's all understandable there. But on one final positive note, the acting for the lead characters and most, if not all of the others, was just plain spectacular. That was even the case for those who showed up for an episode or two, or even a couple of scenes, like Geneva Dansani for example. On the other hand though, when speaking of the flaws and the negatives, they never really outweighed the positives, but nonetheless they did exist. In order though not to get anyone worked up here, I'm just gonna talk about one flaw. Just the one. Now season 3 did use a lot of characters mostly as plot tools to prove how amazing Claire is, how human she is, and how she is the most flawless woman in the whole wide world. So a lot of it felt like it was based on wanting to put Claire in a good light based on common principles and morals, rather than actually any kind of belief in said morals. This season, for example, spent a lot of time boring us with the medical genius that is Claire, over and over again, but then it also went to ignore developing someone like Joe Abernathy. Now I know what some of you are gonna tell me here. Been there, had to deal with that. I know that some of you are gonna say, but in the books this was boring, and in the books this was or was not that. But may I remind you, this is a for television adaptation. So as amazing as the novels are, and they are, I don't really give a rat's ass about the novels right now because I'm not criticizing the books. I am instead criticizing the series, and what could be boring on one could be just amazing on the other. Besides that, once again, I should highlight two aspects here. Joe Abernathy's development could have been better for Claire. The kind of time spent repeatedly polishing her as this amazing doctor could have been spent showing their common struggles. And this could have also aided in making that slavery situation from episode 12 feel a lot stronger. I mean a woman who had to fight against this racism situation in the 20th century having to deal with the slavery situation. That would have been amazing. Instead though, here's where we actually saw Joe. 1. Having Claire welcome him sitting next to her because guess what? She's the only one who wasn't a racist in med school. 2. On their day of graduation because it made sense that they both graduated and to establish the friendship. 3. Him trying to stop her from pushing herself in surgery because she's an amazing and extremely motivated surgeon who doesn't give up. 4. Him calling her while she was back in Scotland in a manner of speaking to express how she is the best surgeon mankind has ever known. Number 5. Him calling her in for that bone situation, only for her to just guess the age of those bones, because once again, she's just a genius and no one else is. Number 6. Her going to him to consult him about whether or not Jaime would want her, and him telling her she's amazing. Number 7. Him being there to tell her that Frank died, which is basically a scene that is once more all about her. So what I'm basically trying to say is this was a cliche. The entire world doesn't just revolve around someone, not even Claire, not even the lead of any series. But once again, even though there were bits and pieces there that I didn't like about the season, the positives always outweighed the negatives. So all in all, it was just an amazing season. But do let me know in the comments what you thought of this finale and the season. Who was your favorite newly introduced character on the season? What was your favorite scene? What was your favorite episode? Everything pretty much. Let me know as well if you liked this video by dropping it a much appreciated like. And remember, it is always much appreciated as well if you subscribe and enable notifications for my future videos. And until I see you next time, thank you all for watching and have a good one.